I've been driving trucks for 25 years and I've seen some strange things on the road, but nothing compares to what happened to me on that moonless night in the Nevada desert. It's the reason I don't drive after dark anymore, and why my hands still shake when I see a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. It was just past midnight and I was hauling a load of electronics from Reno to Las Vegas. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the emptiness. My radio crackled with static. Out here, even the strongest signals struggled to reach. I was alone, or so I thought. The first time I noticed them, I didn't think much of it. A pair of headlights in my mirror, probably another trucker making the night run. But something felt off. They were too bright, too white, like twin full moons hanging in the darkness behind me. I eased off the accelerator, figuring they'd pass. Nobody likes to be stuck behind a big rig, especially on an empty road. But they didn't pass. They just sat there, maybe 100 yards back, perfectly matching my speed. "All right, buddy," I muttered. "Have it your way." I tapped the brakes, slowing down to 55. The headlights slowed too, maintaining that exact distance. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't normal. I fumbled for the CB radio, hoping to make contact with whoever was back there. "Breaker 1, 9, this is Big Red. You got your brights on back there, good buddy? Over." Static. I tried again. "Hey, anyone on this channel? I've got a vehicle riding my tail with some mighty bright headlights. Anyone know what's going on?" Over. More static, then a voice crackled through, distorted and faint. "Big Red, turn, back." "Say again, you're breaking up." "Over." But there was nothing but static after that. I glanced in my mirror again. The headlights were still there, unwavering, unblinking. I'm not a superstitious man, but every instinct I had was screaming at me that something was wrong. I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing my rig up to 70, then 75. The speedometer needle crept towards 80, and the whole truck shuddered with the effort. The headlights kept pace effortlessly. My heart was pounding now, my palms slick with sweat on the wheel. I'd been driving this route for years, and I knew there was a rest stop coming up in about 10 miles. If I could make it there, maybe I could figure out what the hell was going on. Those 10 miles were the longest of my life. The headlights never wavered, never fell back, never got closer. Just two piercing white orbs boring into my mirrors, my mind, my soul. I saw the sign for the rest stop and nearly cried with relief. I took the exit ramp faster than I should have, the truck swaying dangerously. I pulled into the brightly lit parking area and slammed on the brakes, my trailer jackknifing slightly with the sudden stop. I leapt from the cab, my legs shaky, and spun around to confront whoever had been following me. There was nothing there. The exit ramp was empty. The highway beyond was dark and silent. I stood there, gasping for breath, my mind reeling. Had I imagined it all? Was I so tired that I'd hallucinated those headlights? A loud hiss made me jump. It was just the air brakes on my truck settling after the hard stop. I laughed nervously, running a hand through my sweat-soaked hair. Maybe I did need some rest. I decided to take a quick nap in the cab before continuing on. As I climbed back into the truck, movement caught my eye. There was someone standing at the edge of the parking lot, barely visible in the shadows beyond the floodlights. A figure in what looked like an old-fashioned trucker's outfit. Jeans, flannel shirt, baseball cap. "Hey," I called out. "You see any weird vehicles on the road tonight?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move. I squinted, trying to make out more details, but it was like looking at a smudge on a photograph. My eyes just couldn't seem to focus. "Hello?" I tried again. "You okay, buddy?" Slowly, the figure raised an arm and pointed back towards the highway. A chill ran through me as I noticed the arm seemed too long, the proportions all wrong. I blinked and the figure was gone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Whatever was going on, I didn't want to stick around to find out more. I started the engine and pulled out of the rest stop, my eyes darting constantly to the mirrors. For a few blissful minutes, the road behind me was dark. I started to relax, to convince myself that I'd just been overly tired seeing things that weren't there. Then I saw them, those damn headlights, appearing suddenly in my mirror as if they'd materialized out of thin air. But this time they were closer, much closer. I let out a strangled yell and floored it. The engine roared as I pushed it to its limit, 80 miles per hour, 85, 90. The whole truck was shaking, the steering wheel vibrating in my white-knuckled grip. The headlights stayed right with me. Ahead, I could see the glow of Las Vegas on the horizon. If I could just make it to the city, to other people, other cars, 95 miles per hour. The fastest I'd ever driven this rig. The headlights were so close now they filled my mirrors, bathing the cab in harsh white light. I couldn't see the vehicle behind them, just that pitiless, blinding glare. 100 miles per hour. The engine was screaming. Warning lights flashed on my dashboard. I didn't care. All that mattered was escaping those headlights. Suddenly, my radio crackled to life. Through the static, I heard a voice. Old, weary, infinitely sad. "You can't outrun them, son. Nobody ever does." The headlights surged forward. I felt a moment of absolute terror as they washed over me, through me. The world turned white. Then, nothing. I came to in a hospital bed 3 days later. They told me my truck had been found on the side of the road, the engine still running. There was no sign of an accident, no damage to the vehicle, but I was slumped over the wheel, unresponsive. The doctors couldn't explain it. As far as they could tell, I was perfectly healthy, just asleep. They called it a freak occurrence, possibly related to exhaustion. I knew better. It's been 5 years since that night. I still drive trucks, but never after dark, never alone on empty highways, and I never ever look too closely at the headlights in my rearview mirror. Because sometimes late at night when I'm lying in bed, I can still see them, those harsh white lights bearing down on me. And I hear that old sad voice on the radio. "You can't outrun them, son. Nobody ever does." And I know that one day those headlights will come for me again. And next time I won't wake up in a hospital bed. Next time they'll take me for good. So if you're out there on the dark highways and you see a pair of headlights that don't look quite right, that follow too close and shine too bright, don't try to outrun them. Just pull over, close your eyes, and pray they pass you by. Because out there in the night there are things that even the bravest trucker fears. Things that lurk just beyond the reach of your high beams, waiting for the unwary. And sometimes they drive with their headlights on. The first rule of trucking through Navajo Nation: don't stop at night. The second rule: if you have to stop, don't get out of your rig. I broke both rules that moonless night in northern Arizona, and I've been looking over my shoulder ever since. It was supposed to be a routine run, hauling electronics from Phoenix to Salt Lake City. I'd made the trip 100 times before, but never this late. The sun had set hours ago, leaving me alone on a 2-lane blacktop that cut through the heart of the desert. My dashboard clock read 2:17 a.m. when I heard the first pop. Then came the flap, flap, flap of rubber against asphalt. Blowout. Cursing under my breath, I eased the big rig onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, staring into the inky blackness beyond my headlights. The air in the cab felt thick, oppressive. Something in the back of my mind whispered that I should just keep driving, damaged tire be damned. But that was crazy talk. I couldn't risk wrecking the whole rig over a flat. Grabbing my flashlight, I climbed down from the cab. The desert night hit me like a physical force. The silence, the cold, the vast emptiness of it all. My flashlight beam seemed pitifully small against the darkness. The rear driver's side tire was shredded. Must have hit something on the road, though I couldn't remember feeling any impact. As I walked back to the cab to grab the jack and spare, a coyote howled in the distance. The sound sent a shiver down my spine. That's when I noticed the smell. Like wet dog and rotting meat, so strong it made my eyes water. I swung my flashlight around, half expecting to see a carcass nearby. Nothing but sand and scrub brush. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I'd heard stories from other truckers, tales whispered at rest stops and over CB radios. Stories about this stretch of road, about things that lurked in the darkness, things that wore the skins of animals, or worse. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. "Just change the damn tire and get moving." I got to work, trying to ignore the way the shadows seemed to shift and dance at the edge of my flashlight beam. The coyote howled again, closer this time, too close. My hands were shaking as I loosened the lug nuts. Sweat trickled down my back despite the chill in the air. I kept glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching me. The jack creaked as I raised the truck. In the silence, it sounded as loud as a gunshot. I flinched, dropping the tire iron. It hit the asphalt with a clang that echoed across the desert. That's when I saw it. Just for a moment, illuminated by my fallen flashlight. a face peering at me from behind my truck. But it wasn't human. The eyes were too large, too yellow. The mouth was full of teeth that glinted in the darkness. I scrambled backwards, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. My back hit the side of the truck and I used it to pull myself up, my legs weak and rubbery. The thing, whatever it was gone, but I could hear something moving in the brush beside the road. Something big. I lunged for the cab door, yanking it open and practically throwing myself inside. My trembling fingers fumbled with the keys, but finally the engine roared to life. I didn't care about the half-changed tire or the jack still under the truck. I just needed to get out of there. The truck lurched forward, the damaged tire flapping wildly. I pushed the accelerator to the floor, praying the wheel wouldn't come off completely. In my side mirror, I caught a glimpse of movement, a figure running on all fours, keeping pace with my truck. It was shaped like a man but moved like an animal. Its skin seemed to ripple and shift in the moonlight. I blinked and it was gone. But I could still hear it, a scratching sound on the side of my trailer, like claws on metal. The CB radio crackled to life, making me jump. Through the static, I heard a voice, low, guttural, barely human. "Pull over, driver, you're losing air in that tire. Let me help you change it." My blood ran cold. I hadn't broadcast any distress call. There was no way anyone could know about my flat tire. I snatched up the radio. "Who is this? How do you know about my tire?" Laughter came through the speaker, a sound that raised goosebumps on my arms. "I know many things, driver. I know the taste of your fear. I know the sound of your heart racing. Pull over, let me in." I threw the radio down, my hand shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. The flapping of the damaged tire was getting worse, the whole truck shuddering with each revolution. A thump on the roof made me cry out, then another, like something was up there trying to get in. "No, no, no," I chanted, tears streaming down my face. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in the real world. Ahead I saw lights, a gas station still miles away, but a beacon of hope in the darkness. If I could just make it there, to other people, to civilization. The windshield exploded inward. Glass rained down on me as something huge and impossibly strong landed on the hood. In the glow of the dashboard lights, I saw a face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It was like a coyote's skull stretched over a human face, with eyes that burned with an otherworldly hunger. I screamed, jerking the wheel hard to the right. The truck veered off the road, tires skidding in the loose sand. The thing on the hood lost its grip, tumbling away into the darkness. The world spun. I felt the truck tip, then roll. Metal screamed as the trailer jackknifed. My head slammed against the side window and everything went black. I came to with the taste of blood in my mouth and the acrid smell of diesel in my nostrils. The truck was on its side, the windshield a spider web of cracks. Outside, the desert was silent. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to wait for help. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that if I stayed in that truck, I wouldn't live to see the dawn. I crawled out through the shattered windshield, glass crunching under my hands and knees. The gas station lights were closer now, maybe a mile away. I started running. Behind me, I heard a howl. Not a coyote this time, something else, something hungry. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. I could hear it behind me, the sound of something running on all fours, getting closer with each passing second. The gas station lights grew brighter. I could make out the shape of the building now, the pumps, a single car parked out front. So close. Hot breath on the back of my neck. A low, hungry growl. I dove forward, hitting the pavement of the gas station lot hard enough to knock the wind out of me. I rolled onto my back, expecting to see slavering jaws descending on me. There was nothing there, just empty desert stretching back to my overturned truck. A sleepy-looking attendant came out, asking if I was okay. I babbled something about an accident, about needing to call the police. He looked at me like I was crazy, and maybe I was. They never found any evidence of what chased me. The police report chalked it up to an animal, probably a coyote, that spooked me and caused the accident. The other truckers, they knew better. They'd heard the stories. I don't drive that route anymore. I don't drive at night at all, because now I know the truth about what lurks in the shadows of the desert. I know about the things that wear the skins of animals and men, the things that hunger in the dark. And I know that somewhere out there, in the vast emptiness of the Arizona desert, something is waiting for another trucker to break those two simple rules. Don't stop at night. And if you have to stop, don't get out of your rig, because once you do, you're in their territory. And they're always hungry. They say you should never meet your doppelganger. They say it's an omen of death. But what happens when you don't just meet your double? You watch him steal your life. It was just another night on the road for me, or so I thought. Little did I know that a routine fuel stop would turn into the most terrifying experience of my life, leaving me questioning my very existence. The neon sign of Big Joe's truck stop buzzed faintly as I pulled my rig into the nearly empty lot. It was that weird hour, too late for the dinner crowd, too early for the breakfast bunch. Just a few lone wolves like myself, fueling up and grabbing coffee before hitting the long, dark highway again. I yawned as I climbed down from the cab, my joints creaking in protest. 30 years of trucking had left their mark, etched in the lines on my face and the ache in my bones. But it was the only life I knew, the only one I wanted. The pump clicked as I filled up my tank, the scent of diesel thick in the air. That's when I saw him, or rather me. At first I thought it was just my reflection in the dusty window of the convenience store, but reflections don't move independently. Reflections don't walk out of the store carrying a cup of coffee that's fixed exactly how you like it. I blinked hard, certain I was hallucinating from fatigue. But when I opened my eyes, he was still there. An exact copy of me, down to the faded Peterbilt cap and the small scar on my chin from a childhood accident. Our eyes met, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He smiled, my smile, but there was something off about it, something predatory. "Hey there," he called out, his voice a perfect match for my own. "Long night ahead?" I couldn't speak. My mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. This was impossible. It had to be a dream, a hallucination, anything but reality. He chuckled, taking a sip of his coffee. "Cat got your tongue. That's not like you, Joe. You're usually quite the talker." My blood ran cold. He knew my name. Of course he did. He was me, but he wasn't. He couldn't be. What are you?" I finally managed to croak out. His smile widened, showing too many teeth. "I'm you, Joe, the new and improved version, and I'm here to take over." Before I could react, he was moving. Quick as a snake, he closed the distance between us. I felt a sharp pain in my neck, and the world started to spin. "Don't fight it," I heard him say, my own voice echoing strangely in my ears. "It'll all be over soon." The last thing I saw before darkness took me was my own face, grinning down at me. I woke up in unfamiliar surroundings, my head pounding and my mouth dry. It took me a moment to realize I was in the sleeper cab of a truck, but not my truck. This one was newer, cleaner, with that unmistakable scent of a vehicle fresh off the lot. Panic set in as the memories came flooding back. The doppelganger, the attack. I scrambled out of the bunk, my heart racing. The cab was empty, the keys dangling in the ignition. Through the windshield, I could see we were parked at another truck stop, this one bustling with morning activity. I stumbled out of the truck, drawing curious glances from other drivers. That's when I caught sight of my reflection in the chrome bumper and nearly screamed. The face looking back at me wasn't mine. It was younger, maybe mid-30s, with no gray in the beard and fewer lines around the eyes. I raised a hand to my face, watching the stranger in the reflection do the same. "No," I whispered. "This can't be happening." But it was. Somehow, impossibly, I was in a different body, a different life. I fumbled in the pockets of the unfamiliar jeans I was wearing, finding a wallet. The driver's license inside showed the face I now wore, with the name Mike Thompson printed below it. My mind reeled. Had I somehow switched bodies with this Mike Thompson? Or had my doppelganger done something even stranger? Had he overwritten my very existence? I needed answers. I headed into the truck stop, making a beeline for the payphones. With shaking hands, I dialed my home number. "Hello?" a woman's voice answered. "My wife, Sarah." "Sarah, it's me," I said, then winced at the unfamiliar voice that came out. "It's Joe. I know this is going to sound crazy, but—" "I'm sorry," she interrupted, her voice cold. "I don't know any Joe, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't call here again. My husband doesn't like strangers bothering me." The line went dead. I stood there, the receiver still pressed to my ear, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. She didn't know me. My own wife didn't know me. In a daze, I wandered over to the counter and ordered a coffee. As the waitress poured it, she gave me a friendly smile. "Long night, hon? You look like you've seen a ghost." I managed a weak smile in return. "You could say that. Hey, this might sound strange, but do you know a trucker named Joe Miller? Drives a blue Peterbilt, usually stops here on his routes? Her brow furrowed in confusion. Joe Miller? Can't say I do, hon. We get a lot of drivers through here, but that name doesn't ring a bell. You sure you got the right truck stop? I nodded numbly, my worst fears confirmed. It wasn't just Sarah who didn't know me. I had been erased, replaced by that thing that looked like me. As I sat there trying to wrap my head around the impossible situation I found myself in, a news report on the small TV above the counter caught my attention. In local news, authorities are still searching for Mike Thompson, a truck driver who disappeared from a rest stop 3 days ago. Thompson's truck was found abandoned with no signs of foul play. His family is offering a reward for any information. The room seemed to spin around me. 3 days ago? But I had just woken up in this body. What had happened in those missing days? I staggered out of the truck stop, gasping for air. The world I knew had been ripped away, replaced by a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. As I stood there trying to decide what to do next, I saw him. My doppelganger. He was climbing into my truck, my old truck, on the other side of the lot. Our eyes met and he grinned, giving me a mocking salute before pulling out onto the highway. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I had to find him, to confront him, to get my life back. Even if it meant chasing him across every highway in the country. I climbed back into Mike Thompson's truck, my truck now, I supposed. The engine roared to life, a sound both familiar and alien. As I pulled out onto the open road, following the dust trail of my stolen life, a chill ran down my spine. What if I wasn't the first? What if this body I now inhabited wasn't Mike Thompson's originally, but someone else's that my doppelganger had stolen and discarded? How long had this been going on? How many lives had been erased, overwritten, replaced? And more importantly, how could I stop it? The highway stretched out before me, an endless ribbon of asphalt under a sky that was just beginning to lighten with the coming dawn. Somewhere out there, wearing my face and living my life, was the answer to all these questions. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, determination setting in. I would find him, I would get my life back, and I would make sure he never did this to anyone else ever again. Because out here on the open road, where the lines between reality and nightmare blur like the yellow stripes on the asphalt, anything is possible. Even meeting your own doppelganger at a fuel pump in the dead of night. And now, as I chase my own ghost across the highways of America, I have only one thought. Never trust a reflection that moves on its own. It might just be waiting to steal your life. They say the devil's in the details, but I never thought I'd find him under the hood of my truck. What started as a routine haul turned into a night of mechanical mayhem that defied all logic, and maybe even the laws of physics. The first sign of trouble came just after midnight. I was hauling a load of electronics from Detroit to Chicago, a route I'd driven 100 times before. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the empty highway stretching out before me. That's when I heard it, a soft ticking sound coming from the engine. As a veteran trucker with 20 years under my belt, I know every whisper and groan my rig can make. This was new, and in my experience, new is never good. I eased off the accelerator, ears straining to catch the sound over the usual rumble of the engine. The ticking grew louder, more insistent, like a clock counting down to something I didn't want to face. "Come on, baby," I muttered, patting the dashboard. "Don't do this to me now." As if in response, the engine let out a loud bang. The truck shuddered, and black smoke began pouring from under the hood. I cursed, guiding the rig onto the shoulder as the engine sputtered and died. I sat there for a moment listening to the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. The silence of the night pressed in around me, broken only by the occasional rush of wind from a passing car. With a sigh, I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from the cab. The smell of burning oil hit me as soon as I opened the door. Not good. I popped the hood, wincing at the cloud of steam that billowed out. As it cleared, I shone my flashlight over the engine, looking for the source of the problem. What I saw made me question my sanity. The engine was wrong. Parts were in the wrong place. Hoses connected to nothing. And was that a carburetor? My truck hadn't used a carburetor in decades. "What the hell?" I muttered, reaching out to touch a piece of metal that definitely shouldn't have been there. As my fingers brushed against it, the entire engine shuddered. I jerked my hand back, heart pounding. In the beam of my flashlight, I could have sworn I saw the metal ripple, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a thrown stone. I blinked hard, certain I was hallucinating from fatigue. When I looked again, the engine seemed normal. Well, as normal as a broken-down engine can be. Shaking my head, I reached for my phone to call for a tow. No signal, of course. That's when I saw the lights in the distance. A gas station, its neon sign a beacon of hope in the darkness. It couldn't have been more than a quarter mile away. I hesitated, glancing back at my truck. Every instinct told me not to leave it, but I needed help, and that gas station was my best bet. "I'll be right back," I told the truck, feeling slightly foolish for talking to it. "Don't go anywhere." The walk to the gas station seemed to take forever. The air was unnaturally still, and my footsteps echoed loudly on the asphalt. As I got closer, I could make out the name on the sign, Limbo's Last Chance Gas and Service. The place looked like it had been plucked straight out of the 1950s, all chrome and neon. A single car was parked out front, a cherry-red '57 Chevy that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in. The inside of the station matched the outside retro decor, a jukebox in the corner playing old rock and roll and not a digital display in sight. Behind the counter stood an old man, his weathered face creased in a permanent frown. He looked up as I approached, his eyes a startling shade of ice blue. "Evening," he drawled. "Car trouble?" "Truck, actually," I replied. "About a quarter mile down the road. Engine just died on me. Any chance you've got a mechanic on duty?" The old man's frown deepened. "Ain't got no mechanic, just me." My heart sank. "You wouldn't happen to have a tow truck, would you?" He shook his head slowly. "Ain't got one of those neither, but I might be able to help you out all the same." Before I could ask what he meant, he reached under the counter and pulled out an old oil-stained book. The cover was worn leather, the pages yellowed with age. "This here's the manual," he said, his voice taking on an almost reverent tone. "Got the solution to every engine problem ever invented, and some that ain't been invented yet." I stared at him, wondering if this was some kind of joke. "Look, I appreciate the offer, but I really need a professional mechanic. My rig's not exactly a standard vehicle." The old man's eyes twinkled. "Son, there ain't nothing standard about your problem. Now, you want my help or not?" Something in his tone made me pause. I thought about my truck, its engine rearranging itself before my eyes. Maybe standard wasn't what I needed right now. "All right," I said finally. "What do I need to do?" The old man smiled, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp. "You go on back to your truck. I'll be along shortly." I hesitated, but what choice did I have? I thanked him and headed back out into the night. As I walked back to my truck, a chill ran down my spine. The moon seemed larger now, hanging low and red in the sky. The air crackled with a strange energy, making the hair on my arms stand on end. I reached my truck and popped the hood again, half expecting to see the engine back to normal. Instead, what greeted me was even stranger than before. The engine was gone. In its place was a swirling vortex of gears and pistons constantly shifting and rearranging themselves. Steam hissed from nowhere, and I could hear a sound like distant whispers coming from deep within the mechanical chaos. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. Engines didn't just turn into whatever this was. Fascinating, ain't it? I whirled around to find the old man standing behind me, the leather-bound book tucked under his arm. I hadn't heard him approach. What is this?" I managed to stammer out. The old man peered into the engine compartment, nodding as if he saw this kind of thing every day. "Looks like you've got a case of quantum uncertainty in your crankshaft. Nasty business. Causes the engine to exist in multiple states at once. Schrodinger's piston, if you will." He chuckled at his own joke, but I was too shocked to appreciate the humor. "How do we fix it?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. The old man opened his book, flipping through pages covered in diagrams that hurt my eyes to look at. "Well, first we need to collapse the wave function, then it's just a matter of realigning the temporal gears and purging any excess dimensional bleed." He reached into the swirling vortex of metal, his hand passing through solid parts as if they were smoke. When he pulled it back out, he was holding what looked like a spark plug. If spark plugs were made of shifting, iridescent metal that seemed to fade in and out of existence. "Hold this," he said, handing it to me. As soon as my fingers closed around it, a jolt of electricity shot up my arm. The world around me blurred, and for a moment I saw everything. Every possible configuration of my engine, every road I could have taken, every choice I could have made in my life. Then as suddenly as it began, it was over. I gasped, falling to my knees. The old man stood over me, smiling that too sharp smile. "There we go," he said, sounding satisfied. "Should be right as rain now." I looked up at the engine compartment, hardly daring to hope. To my amazement, everything was back to normal. The engine sat there, solid and real, looking for all the world like it had never been anything else. "How?" I began, but the old man cut me off. "Best not to ask too many questions, son. Some things the human mind ain't meant to understand. You just get back on the road and forget this ever happened." He turned to leave, but I called out after him, "Wait, how can I repay you?" The old man paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Oh, don't you worry about that. We'll settle up someday. Everyone does in the end." With that, he walked away, fading into the darkness like a mirage. I climbed back into my truck, my hands shaking as I turned the key. The engine roared to life, purring like it was fresh off the assembly line. As I pulled back onto the highway, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The gas station was gone, as if it had never existed. In its place was nothing but empty fields stretching to the horizon. I drove on through the night, my mind reeling from what I'd experienced. I knew I'd never be able to explain it to anyone. Hell, I could barely explain it to myself. But one thing was certain, from now on I'd be paying a lot more attention to the details under my hood. Because sometimes the devil really is in the details, and sometimes he's the one holding the wrench. They say time stands still in a snowstorm. But what if it's not time that's frozen, but you? Trapped in an endless loop of white where every mile looks the same and tomorrow never comes. That's where I found myself on a delivery run that should have been routine but turned into a nightmare of ice and isolation. It started like any other job, a long haul from Minneapolis to Seattle, cutting through the northern states in the dead of winter. I'd made the run a dozen times before, and yeah, the weather could get nasty, but nothing I couldn't handle. 20 years behind the wheel teaches you a thing or two about driving in bad conditions. Or so I thought. The storm hit just as I was crossing into North Dakota. At first it was just a few flakes, nothing to worry about, but within minutes the world outside my windshield turned into a swirling vortex of white. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rocking my rig from side to side. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. The wipers were fighting a losing battle against the onslaught of snow. Visibility dropped to near zero. All I could see was an endless expanse of white, broken only by the faint glow of my headlights reflecting off the falling snow. "Just gotta make it to the next town," I muttered to myself, knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Find a place to wait it out." But the next town never came. I drove for what felt like hours, the landscape never changing, just an endless ribbon of highway, disappearing into the white void ahead. The clock on my dashboard seemed frozen, the minutes refusing to tick by. Finally, I saw a sign looming out of the whiteness. "Washburn, 5 miles," it read. I felt a surge of relief. Washburn wasn't much, but it had a truck stop, a place to rest, to wait out the storm. Those 5 miles stretched on forever. The snow fell harder, if that was even possible. The wind screamed, battering my truck. Ice formed on my wipers, on my mirrors. I was driving blind, guided only by instinct and the faint hope of shelter ahead. When I finally saw the lights of the truck stop glowing dimly through the storm, I could have wept with relief. I pulled into the lot, the truck sliding slightly on the ice-slick pavement. As soon as I cut the engine, the silence hit me like a physical force. Without the rumble of the engine, all I could hear was the muffled howl of the wind and the tick-tick-tick of ice pellets against the windshield. I sat there for a moment, gathering my courage to face the storm. Then, bundling up as best I could, I made a run for the truck stop's door. The wind hit me like a sledgehammer as soon as I stepped out of the cab. Snow stung my face, finding its way into every gap in my clothing. I staggered through the parking lot, barely able to see the building in front of me. Finally, I reached the door and yanked it open, all but falling inside. As it slammed shut behind me, cutting off the roar of the wind, I found myself in silence. The truck stop was empty. No customers huddled over coffee at the counter. No bored cashier flipping through a magazine. Just empty booths, a deserted kitchen, and a faint buzzing from the fluorescent lights overhead. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. No response. I made my way to the counter, looking for any sign of life. A half-filled coffee pot sat on the burner, steam still rising from it. A newspaper lay open on the counter, the date clearly visible, February 13th. Today's date. But something felt off about it. I pulled out my phone to check the time, but the screen was dead. Must have died in the cold. With a shrug, I poured myself a cup of coffee and settled into a booth. The storm raged on outside, snow piling up against the windows. I decided to wait it out here. Someone was bound to show up eventually, right? Hours passed. Or at least I think they did. The clock on the wall never seemed to move, its hands frozen at 11:37. The storm outside never let up. An endless curtain of white. As the silence pressed in around me, a creeping unease began to set in. Where was everyone? Why hadn't anyone come to check on the truck stop? And why did it feel like I'd been sitting here for days, even though the clock insisted no time had passed at all? I got up, pacing the length of the truck stop. Everything looked normal but felt off, like a movie set, all surface with nothing behind it. I tried the phone behind the counter, but the line was dead. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The newspaper on the counter, the one I'd seen earlier. The date was different now, February 14th. But that was impossible. I'd been here for hours, but it was still the same day. Wasn't it? Panic rising in my throat, I ran for the door. I had to get out of here, had to find help. But as soon as I stepped outside, the storm engulfed me. I couldn't see my truck, couldn't even see the building I'd just left. There was nothing but white in every direction. I fought my way back inside, slamming the door against the wind. As I turned around, panting, I froze. The truck stop had changed. The booths were arranged differently. The counter was a different color. And the clock on the wall now read 3:42. "What the hell is going on?" I whispered, my voice shaking. I stumbled back to the booth where I'd been sitting. My coffee cup was gone. In its place was a steaming mug I'd never seen before, and next to it a newspaper. Date, February 15th. I ran to the door again, threw it open. The storm raged on, unchanging. I slammed it shut, turned around. The truck stop had shifted again. New layout, new colors, clock reading 7:19. Newspaper on the counter, February 16th. My mind reeled. Was I going crazy? Was this some kind of bizarre hallucination brought on by the cold? I don't know how many times I repeated this cycle. Running out into the storm, coming back to a changed truck stop. Each time the date on the newspaper advanced. Each time I felt a little more of my sanity slipping away. Days passed. Weeks, months. The storm never ended. The truck stop never stayed the same. And I remained trapped, a fly in amber, watching the world change around me while I stayed frozen in time. I tried everything I could think of to break the cycle. I stayed awake for days on end, fighting off sleep. I tried to barricade myself in the truck stop to prevent it from changing. I even tried to drive away in my truck, only to find myself right back where I started, the storm erasing any progress I might have made. Through it all, I never saw another living soul. Just me, the ever-changing truck stop, and the relentless storm. As the days turned into years in this frozen hell, I began to lose hope. Had I died out there on the highway and this was my eternal punishment? Was I trapped in some cosmic glitch doomed to repeat this cycle forever? But then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, something changed. It was subtle at first. The storm seemed a little less intense. The truck stop's changes became less dramatic, and one day I looked at the clock and saw the second hand move. Hope, long buried under layers of despair, began to stir in my chest. I ran to the door, threw it open. The storm was still there, but I could see shapes through it now. My truck, the gas pumps, the highway beyond. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out into the snow. The wind was bitter cold, but it no longer felt like it was trying to flay the skin from my bones. I made it to my truck, climbed inside. The engine started on the first try, as if it hadn't been sitting idle for what felt like years. I pulled out onto the highway, heart pounding. The storm was breaking up, patches of clear sky visible through the clouds. As I drove, I kept expecting to find myself back at that damn truck stop. But the miles rolled by, and new landscapes appeared. Towns I'd never seen before. People going about their lives. I finally pulled into a rest stop, my hands shaking as I cut the engine. The The sun was shining, no sign of snow anywhere. I walked into the building on unsteady legs, half expecting it to be empty. But it wasn't. People were there, real people who looked at me and saw me. A TV in the corner was playing the news. The date on the screen made me stagger. July 15th, 5 months after I'd started my ill-fated journey. I'd lost 5 months of my life to that endless blizzard, that time-twisted truck stop. 5 months that had felt like an eternity. As I sit here now, trying to make sense of what happened to me, I'm left with more questions than answers. Was it all in my head? Some kind of stress-induced fugue state? Or did I stumble into a place where the normal rules of time and space don't apply? I don't know if I'll ever have the answers, but one thing's for certain. I'll never look at a snowstorm the same way again, because now I know that sometimes the real danger isn't the storm itself, but the possibility of getting lost in it forever. So if you're ever driving on a lonely highway and a blizzard rolls in, do yourself a favor. Don't stop. Don't pull over. Just keep driving until you're out the other side, because you never know when a simple pit stop might turn into an eternity of white. They say you never forget your first delivery as a trucker, but it's the last one that haunts you forever. Mine was supposed to be a simple run Albuquerque to Phoenix, hauling a load of electronics. Instead, it turned into a one-way trip down a highway to hell, with a cargo that defied explanation and a destination that wasn't on any map. The sun was setting as I pulled out of the depot, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. My rig, old reliable Betty, purred beneath me as we hit the open road. After 30 years behind the wheel, I was ready to hang up my keys. One last job, then it was retirement, grandkids, and lazy Sunday barbecues. If only I'd known what was waiting for me out there in the gathering darkness. The first few hours were uneventful. The radio kept me company, playing a mix of classic rock and late-night talk shows. As midnight approached, the chatter gave way to static, and an uneasy silence settled over the cab. That's when I noticed the smell. At first, it was just a whiff, something acrid and chemical like burning plastic. I figured it was coming from outside, maybe a brush fire in the distance. But it got stronger, seeping into the cab until it was all I could smell. I pulled over at the next rest stop, determined to find the source. As soon as I killed the engine, the smell vanished. Puzzled, I did a walk around, checking for any signs of trouble. Nothing seemed out of place. With a shrug, I climbed back into the cab and hit the road again. But as soon as I started driving, the smell returned, stronger than ever. Something wasn't right. I reached for my manifest, double-checking the cargo details. Electronics assorted, it read. Nothing unusual there. But as I set the clipboard down, I noticed something odd. The paper seemed to shimmer in the dim light of the cab, the letters shifting and rearranging themselves. I blinked hard, certain I was seeing things. When I looked again, the manifest was back to normal. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. The result of too many hours on the road and not enough sleep. As the miles rolled by, strange things began to happen. Road signs appeared and disappeared in my headlights, showing destinations that didn't exist. The GPS went haywire, insisting I was driving through the ocean one minute and the heart of New York City the next. And all the while, that smell grew stronger. I tried calling dispatch, but my phone couldn't get a signal. The CB radio produced nothing but static and what sounded like whispers in a language I didn't recognize. Just as I was considering turning back, I saw lights ahead. A gas station, its neon sign a beacon in the darkness. I pulled in, desperate for a moment of normality. The place looked abandoned, all rust and peeling paint. But there was a light on inside, so I made my way to the door. It swung open with a creak that set my teeth on edge. Behind the counter stood an old man, his face a maze of wrinkles. He smiled as I entered, but there was something off about it, like he was wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. I explained about the smell, about the strange things I'd been seeing. As I talked, his smile grew wider, stretching beyond the limits of what should have been possible. "Ah," he said when I finished. "Sounds like you've got yourself a special delivery." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" He leaned in close, his breath smelling of dust and decay. "Some cargo ain't meant for this world, friend. Best just deliver it and be done." Before I could ask what the hell he was talking about, a noise from outside caught my attention. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across gravel. I turned back to the old man, but he was gone. The entire gas station seemed to shimmer and fade like a mirage in the desert heat. In moments, I was standing alone in an empty lot with no sign that the building had ever existed. Shaken, I hurried back to my truck. As I approached, I could have sworn I saw something moving in the trailer, a shadow pressing against the walls as if trying to get out. My hands were shaking as I climbed into the cab. Part of me wanted to abandon the truck right there to run until I couldn't run anymore, but I couldn't. This was my last delivery. I had to see it through. I started the engine and the smell hit me like a physical force. My eyes watered, my throat burned. The GPS screen flickered to life, showing a route I'd never seen before. A road that shouldn't exist, leading deep into the desert. Against every instinct, I followed it. The world outside my windshield began to change. The desert landscape shifted and warped, taking on impossible geometries. Rock formations twisted into shapes that hurt to look at. The sky above turned a sickly green, roiling with clouds that moved in ways clouds shouldn't. And all the while, that damn smell grew stronger. I drove for what felt like hours, though my watch insisted only minutes had passed. The road narrowed, winding through canyons that seemed to close in around me. More than once, I could have sworn I saw things moving in the shadows. Things that skittered and slithered, always just out of sight. Finally, I came to a stop at the edge of a massive crater. The GPS chimed, informing me I'd reached my destination, but there was nothing here. No receiving depot, no warehouse. Just an endless expanse of barren rock stretching to the horizon. As I sat there, wondering what to do next, I heard a sound from the trailer, a thumping like something pounding to get out, then a screech of tearing metal. I scrambled out of the cab, heart pounding. The rear doors of the trailer were bulging outward, the metal warping and stretching. Whatever was inside wanted out, and it wasn't taking no for an answer. I backed away, watching in horror as the doors finally gave way. A flood of something poured out. It was like liquid shadow, moving with a terrible intelligence. It formed shapes as it flowed, faces, hands, writhing tentacles, only to dissolve and reform in endless, nightmarish combinations. The smell was overwhelming now. It wasn't just burning plastic, it was the scent of reality itself, breaking down. As the whatever it was spread across the ground, a voice echoed in my head. Not words exactly, but concepts. Ancient, hungry, free. I realized then what I'd done. This wasn't just a delivery, it was a jailbreak. And I was the unwitting getaway driver. The shadow thing surged towards me. I turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. The crater's edge had disappeared, replaced by an endless expanse of that twisting, impossible landscape. Just as I felt the cold touch of that liquid darkness on my heel, everything stopped. The world around me froze like someone had hit pause on reality itself. A figure appeared before me. It looked like a man, but its edges were blurry, as if it wasn't quite all there. When it spoke, its voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Well done, driver. Package delivered." I tried to speak, but no words came out. The figure continued, either not noticing or not caring about my distress. "Your contract is complete. Payment will be rendered as agreed." Contract payment? I'd never agreed to any of this. But before I could try to communicate my confusion, the figure raised a hand. "The terms are non-negotiable. Enjoy your retirement." With that, the world lurched. Colors swirled, reality bent, and I felt myself falling through layers of existence I never knew existed. I woke up in my own bed, sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. But then I saw the envelope on my nightstand. Inside was a check for an amount that made my eyes water, and a note. "For services rendered," it read. "Enjoy your retirement, and remember, some deliveries are meant to stay delivered." I've been retired for 5 years now. I've got the grandkids, the Sunday barbecues, everything I ever wanted. But I can't enjoy any of it. Because every night I dream of that dark highway, of the smell of burning reality, of the cargo I set loose upon the world. And I wonder, was it really my last delivery? Or was it just the beginning of something much, much worse? So if you're a trucker and dispatch gives you a job that seems a little too easy, a little too well paid, think twice. Because some loads aren't meant to be delivered, and some highways only go one way.